All right. We are finally here with Genevieve Conaty. I know Genevieve from the time that I used to work at Course Hero. For those who don't know, I was actually originally hired as a product designer on their hair amazing team, and she was the VP of design at Course Hero, and that's how we got to know each other. And then she supported me to actually go and become a product manager. So thank you so much for that. I never genuinely thanked you, but you know that was a huge support that you did back then. So I really thank you for that. And yeah, I want people to get to know you because I have a lot of memories from our time. And I keep telling people, yeah, I had this amazing manager, Genevieve, and we did this, we did that. She believed we should do this and that. And I want people to get to know you. So please.
Ali, it is so fun to be here with you today. And from the moment you mentioned to me sometime last year that you had not one but two podcasts, I was like, ooh, what a thing that is. And if I may give you a compliment in return, if you're comfortable with me sharing this, I hired you partly because a wonderful former colleague of yours described you in a reference call as a legit hustler. And I feel that making this podcast and making your other podcast and doing all of your other endeavors demonstrate that you make things happen and you are a legit hustler, even though you've like divorced from hustle culture, which is a good idea. You still have that like getting stuff done and making things happen in the world as like one of the main things you do. And I think it's so admirable. And I think this podcast is just one of many examples of how you do that. So thank you for being you.
Thank you. Thank you. Means a lot. So I want to start this story, and we just actually chat about something because I didn't know how you pronounce your last name, and that was the first time I'm like, how did I not know after knowing her for almost 7 years now? So, and I heard it's Conaty, and you said it's an Irish root. So, do you want to talk about your background and where you are coming from?
Yes, I would love to. So I have my mom and my dad. And on my mom's side, we are a first generation family. My mom was born in a refugee camp on the way out of Europe during World War II. So that is my heritage on that side. And on my dad's side of the family, that is like a almost like traditional story of Irish and Italian immigrants coming to the United States. It's not first generation on that side, but it's not that far back either. And the Irish last name Conaty is very uncommon in the US. But my own dad, who has that last name, went back to Ireland last year and discovered that it's extremely common in that place. And like it's even associated with a certain county that he had never heard of. But if you go there, it's called County Cavan. Apparently, everyone is called Conaty there. So it's been really fun to have that name, which has this big story behind it if people care to get into it. The other thing that happened one time was I was teaching someone in an internship type situation. She was a student and I was working at Motorola at the time. And we went through this whole wonderful internship. It was like 3 months or 6 months. And then she sent me her final report at the end. And it said her name, and then it had my name. But what she wrote for my name was Jen, Gen, as a first name, and then Ovive, O with an apostrophe, Veeve, Jen Ovive. And she said, I thought you were Irish. So I thought your last name was Ovive. So my last name has confounded people for a long time, and I kind of appreciate having something I can talk about my name because that precedes me. You know, before people meet me, they see that name, and it's confusing to some people. So it's
Yeah.
fun to have a lot of stories around that to kind of break the ice.
Another thing I didn't know about you that you're from an immigrant family. Hey, I'm an immigrant too. So it's actually interesting. I kind of want to know, and for the audience to also let know, how was it growing up? Because I know you grew up on the East Coast, and if you have any story, if you want to say how you grew up and like how did you end up going to college and then going to CMU and yeah, all the good stuff.
I will do the really TL version of this, but my mother's family immigrated into Chicago and then lived in Florida as like their two anchor points. So I was actually born in Wisconsin, which is like next door to Chicago, partly because my mom had gravitated there after living elsewhere in the US. She wanted to go back to the Midwest, and she ended up at a place called Marquette University, which is where she met my dad. And after I was born in Wisconsin, they moved around a fair amount. My dad was what they call an itinerant scholar. So he was like moving from university to university. He got his tenure at Salt Lake City in Salt Lake City. So that was like a base we could have. But then he preferred to work at the University of Chicago. So we ended up going back to Wisconsin. And the time where we ended up on the East Coast is when both of my parents started working for the federal government of the United States.
I see.
And so it's a little bit of context for what's going on right now in the government. My mother worked for the Library of Congress and my dad worked for the Department of Education for like a huge chunk of their careers. And so I, in addition to identifying as like from an immigrant background, I also identify as someone whose like parents devoted their lives to public service. And so it's a moment to be chatting with you, Ali.
That's awesome. Then how did you think you should be, or how did you start like feeling that you are that designer that you became and you started like leading companies? And I know you jumped around countries as well, like whatever story you want to share about that time as well, that would be interesting.
Ooh, I love that question. I am sure it started really early, like when I was a little child. Like I'm talking to you from my office and I can see things I made as a little child in the office. But something I was thinking about recently was I did my undergraduate degree in a technical discipline because I was at this like highfalutin university. I thought I needed like a very technical degree coming out of that university. Pardon me. And so I graduated with a degree in mathematical and computational science. And then I looked at that degree. I'm sure you've heard things like this from others on the show. I was like, what do you do with that degree? Like, I want to do something that helps people. So like, what's my move? And so I looked at two tracks. I looked at epidemiology, which is like study of how diseases proceed through a culture. It's definitely helping people if you do it the right way. And I looked at human computer interaction, HCI, which is like a nickname for that whole discipline when I was in my college years. And that actually, the reason that I ended up picking that branch was because of one specific professor. His name is Dr. Terry Winograd. I was able to study with him twice during my undergraduate degree. And he really is like a beacon in the history of design. And in a different podcast, Ali, I can tell you all about him. But really, that like seeing a person operating at that level in that discipline was part of what drew me to that. And then I did find a master's degree program in that human computer interaction discipline.
It's exciting to hear this story because I'm also coming from an engineering background. At the time when I came to Course Hero, this honestly really made me like just looking at your LinkedIn. I exactly remember I even watched a TED talk that you had back then, and I watched it. I'm like, she gets it. Like she's gonna understand like the type of person I am. So I want to work with her. It was such a great time working with you at Course Hero. So I want to shift the gears a little bit because we just kept saying Course Hero. By the way, we have like a couple of mutual friends. I mean, Hemant is gonna be listening to this, Shireen, and a lot of like the other folks. Yes, exactly. And I told them about the podcast there. So we talk about stories, and one of the stories that I remember, and it was also at the same time that I started like feeling a little bit overwhelmed and like my back pain, as you remember, started like showing up. Um, but I think at the same time, I started also like seeing that you were struggling a little bit and you had to take some time off back then. And like, and I heard it from you, like the chronic pains that you were dealing with. And I think that was a startup, the wake up call for the both of us. And COVID hit and things even got a little bit more complex. But in a way, for me, it was also like another wake up call. So I want to start with that, and then you take the story because I think it's your show, your story, and that's what I remember. And I want to see what was going on your end.
Yeah, excellent question. So I'm going to just start the story at a specific point. It goes all the way back to like being a little tiny child. So at some point, again, story for another time. But let's start just from when I knew you at Course Hero. So COVID is March 2020. I made a leadership decision at that time, like I'm going to lean in. I'm going to be like the Winston Churchill of COVID. I'm going to have amazing Zoom meetings. I'm going to make everybody feel so connected. I'm going to like put emojis on every single Slack message so people know like you're not just like alone. We're still connected. And that went through some truly like surreal times, like the time where the sky was like orange in San Francisco and in the Bay Area. So like all of the colleagues, we were all like stuck at home, like looking at this like nightmare sky. And it would have been a time to think we're sunk, like we're all isolated and nature's over. So what's happening? And I, as a leader, was like, well, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be like, the sky's orange. I can't change it, but I'm still here. Like, I will put emojis on your Slack messages. I still care about you. I care about what we're doing for work. So I believe what was happening in hindsight, Ali, was that I was leaning in at my own expense. So even on Zoom, the way that I was set up to work on Zoom in my home in that summer of 2020, I was like crouched down in front of a computer. And in order to have like hand gestures and face like very evident in the Zoom, I was like contorting my body like this. And I was hiding from my family because they were all at home connecting to their lives via Zoom. So we actually had two kids on little laptops on Zoom, plus my wife on her laptop on Zoom. So I'm like hiding in a room, bent over like this, just to get my own little private capsule to have a work existence in. And I think my body paid such a price for that. Like, one of my most clear physical pain symptoms was a like sudden attack of like lower back pain on the right side. And I'd never had back problems. I had never experienced back pain. I really didn't know that it was a thing from a personal perspective. Of course, I saw it out there all the time. And we had colleagues at Course Hero who said, you know, I have a bad back, so that's part of my story. But I had not identified that way. I had not thought like, oh yeah, of course everybody has back pain. I was like, I've never had the pleasure of experiencing that back pain. It's not a thing. And overnight in March 2021, it went from just being like, oh, like twinges back there, to being absolutely disabling. Like, I could not stand up. I could not sit down. The only place I could be was like lying down flat, and even flat on my back. If I did certain things, it like hurt so much that it's like, I can't live. This is absolutely impairing my existence. And that was not the only thing that happened around that time. Like, a lot of other physical symptoms like surged around that February and March 2021. And so I went from someone who was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to fix all the problems at my company, to being like, oh no, like I all of a sudden am barely like well enough to show up on Zoom. I started doing work just on voice calls, never Zoom, because I could not sit up and like have a regular Zoom call. And so I'm taking like business calls in the house in excruciating pain, lying down, just to like stay connected to work. And that whole era, now looking back on it, I just realized that I thought I was doing the right thing, because I thought I was using all of my considerable personal energy to support my team and make everyone feel okay. But I did make this like classic mistake, which is that I let that dig into my own personal like well-being, like what I needed to actually be okay as a human being, both physical and mental health wise. I had kind of expelled all of that energy supporting others, which I would probably do again. Like, it's a way that we're wired sometimes. But at this point, I realized like, ooh, that, you know, that terrible quote about the oxygen mask, it is kind of the case. Like, if you give your oxygen to someone else, you will not have any. And that will be like a bad state for you to be in, and you will lose your ability to help them or yourself. So that, I try not to use that analogy, because I don't think the right metaphor for life is like we're in a plane crash, like we're in a depressurized cabin. That's not the way I want to live. So I try not to use that quote, but that is a really vivid depiction of the mistake that I made looking back, was that I didn't realize how far into my own human reserves I was digging by doing all that like giving and wanting to be everything to everyone and help everyone with everything.
It sounds like a very complicated yet painful time. And I want to also like echo, at least from my point of view and my personal experience, in those situations, there's just so much going on in your head. It's like when my back pain hit, and it was actually my early time at Coursera, if you remember, I thought it's work, but at the same time, there was so much personal stories in the back that I always push down,
Yeah.
that I've been uncovering over the past many years, like
Yes, I'm
since the
sure.
back pain. I want to know if that's also a valid story for you. Was there anything beyond the work that was going on that you can share?
Ooh, that is such a good question. That's another like 5 hour conversation we could have. But something I only found out relatively recently is that I had been through, let's put dates on these things. So in 2020, 2013, and then in around 2014 or 2015, I was in like 2 physically traumatic situations. And I won't detail them because they will be triggering for your audience for sure. But they were like borderline capital T trauma, as they would say, like these really, really scary times where I thought I would die or someone close to me would die. And that capital T trauma or little t trauma can actually give you PTSD. Like you can actually have a PTSD response. And so those things happened well before I even worked at Course Hero. But it means that I was operating basically like under like a clinical diagnosis of PTSD that I didn't know I had that entire time. And so it even relates to the physical symptoms I had, because the back pain in my lower right back was also associated with like looking over my shoulder, and I eventually had some that way also. And that's kind of like looking behind yourself to make sure someone's not coming to get you from back there. So it's like the sense of threat that you have from behind your own back can actually contribute to physical back pain. And so that was part of PTSD, was being like, oh, it's going to happen again. Like I'm going to get hurt again, or someone close to me might get hurt again. And so I did, like, with all of this, like piecing things together after the fact, that was operating at the same time. So it certainly wasn't just work. It really was like other deep-seated responses to life experiences, neither of which had really anything to do with work, but they affected my work, and they contributed to the fact that like I didn't have infinite reserves to spend at that time, because I was already operating in like a pretty freaked out state without even realizing it.
Yeah. So sorry to hear that. And I think it's actually very helpful because you mentioned, and without sharing much about this story, but you mentioned after those traumatic events, you start like feeling a little bit of pressure on your shoulder and like feeling that like somebody is running after you or something like
Right,
that,
right, right,
technically.
right. Coming after you.
And then what was some of the other characteristic of that time? This may actually be helpful for folks who may feel that way, is like
Yes.
having that awareness of our postures. Where does
Yeah,
that come
so true.
from? What
Yes.
was what was other signals or other states of your being during that time that now looking back you're like, oh, that could also be that. That could also be related to this thing.
This is such a good question. I speak to everyone in the audience. Like, I wish I had heard someone on a podcast talk about some of this stuff earlier, because now looking back, I'm like, that is clear as day. Like, anyone could have spotted that except me. Like, I went through the whole situation and never saw it. So I share details with the hope that someone listening might be like, maybe this is what's affecting me. So just some examples. I used to commute by car to I live in San Francisco, so it's like a considerable car ride. And I have never liked driving on the freeway. I have been like afraid of that my whole life. I don't like changing lanes. I don't like people merging in front of me. That's just not something I'm not comfortable with. But on that drive between San Francisco and where Course Hero's office was, you have to get on the freeway. And so I have this like horror response about looking behind my shoulder to see if somebody's coming to get me, as like a PTSD expression. And I don't know that. So the looking over your shoulder you have to do in traffic to merge safely, that movement actually reminded me of being in danger. And when you're on the freeway, you actually are in danger. If you
Wow.
merge incorrectly, you will die, right? And so that whole relationship of like what it meant to turn my head to the side, and how I felt imperiled every single day on the way to and from work, I thought I might die. And it was physical. My mind didn't think that, but my body was like, every single time. And
Wow.
I did that like habitually for quite a long time before, in a weird way, COVID helped with this because I was no longer commuting, but I was still wrecking my body in that other way. So it didn't actually help as much as I would have hoped. Um, and then so that noticing just like the sense that maybe you are vulnerable from behind your own shoulder, that is something I would call out for your listeners. Like, that's a thing. Like, if you feel that way when you're merging onto the freeway, and it's not just about driving, like, dig into that potentially. And I'm not saying you have PTSD, listeners. I want you to be aware of these things. And then something else about that time in our life was that Course Hero office was open plan. So everyone had their office out in like a big open space. And there were little meeting rooms tucked all around the office as well.
Yeah.
And what I noticed at that time, and this had been a pattern earlier, but I really hadn't seen it as clearly, I found that if I was trying to work at my open plan office space, so I'm standing at my standing desk, or actually I was sitting then. I now only would have a standing desk, but at the time I was still sitting because my back hadn't caught on yet that wasn't good for me. I hated sitting at my own desk and trying to work. And it's the same thing. I was worried on some level, like a hunted animal. I was worried somebody would come up to me from behind and like talk to me. And if you're like a hunted animal and you're in that state all the time, I was actually in like a fight, flight, or freeze or fawn state all the time when I was at the standing desk, but I mean at my open plan desk. So I didn't realize that, but how it manifested was I booked myself into meeting rooms all day, every day, because I did not want anyone coming up on me from behind, even like a beloved colleague. At some gut level, I was like, I don't want that. So I would book these meeting rooms. I would get there early in the day so I wasn't like using a room someone else needed. I would get all my work done in like the first 2 hours of the day before anybody even got there. And then the rest of my day, while I was in meeting rooms, just having meetings. So I hardly ever was found at my open plan desk. And looking back on that, I'm like, that was a huge message to me that I was not well, because you shouldn't, in my opinion, if you're in an open plan office, if that never works for you, don't work at that company. Like that's like a deal breaker. If you hate working in an open plan office, don't agree to work in one, or go somewhere where you can find an alternative like I did at Course Hero. But those two things, the sense of that threat in driving, overestimated the threat in driving, and then being unable to work at your own work desk at work, much less be creative or do anything good. Like I couldn't even stand there. And I wish I had realized that those were signs that something deeper was going on.
Wow. And I'm saying wow because I remember actually that exact time where you were booking those meeting rooms and you were not at your desk, but we could always find you in one of those rooms and have a conversation. And I remember like even when we had one-on-ones, all of our one-on-ones were back to back in one meeting rooms. It's so interesting. Like, and it's also like on the other side of the game where we are not like the capability of us understanding these things and these signals and supporting each other. Sometimes like people, and I'm just opening this for everyone who's listening. Hey, just be understanding of your colleagues, because some people can potentially be judged for the fact that like they're sitting all day in one meeting room.
Right,
Like
right.
you can
Of
have
course,
all
yeah.
those like negative thoughts about people's actions, but in those moments, maybe it's good to take a step back and maybe empathize with the fact that there might be something that this person or this group of people, they are dealing with something, and we should be supporting them. So thank you for adding those things. For me, it was the other way, where even before getting my back pain, I couldn't sit. Like, if you remember, I was always like walking around. As a matter
I
of
do
fact,
remember that. I remember that.
Hemant and I, we became friends because we started like having these walking meetings around the office or in the office, like just talking all the time while walking. Because for whatever my story is, I couldn't sit and I didn't have to sit. And by sitting in that like office environment, it wasn't for me. So I was always like walking. If I wanted to find Sean or anyone else on the team, I was just walking around, go to the. It's so interesting, like these
Yeah.
little signals, and
Yeah.
people may associate that with ADHD. I don't have ADHD. Like, we tested many times. I don't have ADHD. But people associate it with different things, but this story is different. So I really appreciate you sharing this part of the story. And I want to know what was the path out of it, because we see you today and we met a few weeks ago actually, and we had coffee, and you are amazing. You're in an amazing state and you're feeling great. You have all the cherries with you today, and we want to know what changed, what happened since
Yeah.
then that we have you today.
Ooh, that is such an excellent question, and I'm like honored to be asked that question. And having felt the worst, feeling better, I can see the contrast, and I can also be the living example that no matter how horrible you feel, physically and mentally, there can be a journey out of that, and you don't go back to being whoever you were before, but you get to go forward and be someone you want to be later. And that can happen. And in my story, it takes years and years to happen. So you might actually not be able to do this quickly. This might just be something that unfolds over time. And you might not have to control the process. It might just be happening and you seek help, and little by little, these things happen. I say things like, plants know how to grow, so do you. Like, there are natural processes that happen, including like healing, physical healing. And you don't have to think about that. You don't have to be like, okay, heal now. Like, your body just actually knows how to heal if you allow it to. So part of the story is just giving space for the processes that take place naturally to actually transpire. And if you're a control-oriented person, like I am, continue to be, was for sure then, and continue to be now, relinquishing some control and being like, I'm going to trust that I can feel better, even if I don't make it happen. I think that can be really helpful. So just really quickly, I will tell you a few like milestones on the way to feeling better. So I think I left you off in March 2021. That's when my intense pain in this chapter of my life began, or really like kicked into, like, you can't ignore it. It's absolutely ever present, and it's debilitating, and it's impairing your life. And I don't remember when I had to take 2 blocks of medical leave at Course Hero, just because I literally couldn't like move like a normal person, much less think like the way I wanted to be able to think at work. And during those medical leaves, I felt better. And I was always like, well, now I'm okay. So now I can go back and it'll be fine. But because I hadn't actually addressed any underlying causes, taking those leaves and having like intensive treatment and stuff wasn't sufficient to like pop me out into wellness, because I kept getting not all the way well and then going back and getting unwell again, and leaving and taking a rest and treatment and hoping I would be fine, and then going straight back in, and like I wasn't fine. Like overnight I was fine again. So time's passing, this is happening, and in about spring of 2023, for me, that is when like stuff started just shutting down. Like I literally could not do that anymore. And I took a medical leave mainly for physical health symptoms, and also for some kind of recognition, like my mental health is just absolutely not where it needs to be doing this level of leadership job. Like I cannot do this. I'm doing a disservice to myself and my colleagues and my company, which for me is like morally impossible situation. So I did take a really proper big step away in the form of medical leave. And I had physical treatment options. I had mental treatment options, like all of that stuff we started working on in the spring of 2023. And something I wanted to make sure I mentioned to your audience is, over the course of that summer, I discovered a treatment option, which I wish I had learned about way earlier. And this has acronyms associated with it, so I'll slow down and explain it. The acronyms you might hear are IOP/PHP, or IOP on its own, or PHP on its own. And the things they stand for sound scary, so I'll explain that as well. IOP is Intensive Outpatient Program, and PHP is Partial Hospitalization Program. And so when folks hear that, it sounds like I'm being hospitalized for my mental health. Like, what just happened? Like, I don't need that. Like, I'm okay, aren't I? But I was doing intensive therapy with my one-on-one therapist every single week and not really feeling better. And at some point, my wife's therapist recommended it to my wife to recommend to me. Why don't you check out what is an IOP or what is a PHP? And the way that came to me, it was described as something that can really help people when they are suicidal. And I have never experienced suicidal ideation. That has never been part of my story. Even with all the different ups and downs I've had, that's not a form of suffering I have ever suffered. So when I heard that, I was like, oh no, I can't. Like that's definitely for people who are suffering more than I am. Like that's not the right thing for me. And I think the thing that tipped me into wanting to do it anyway was my own therapist saying, look, like you are working so hard to feel better, but you are not actually feeling better. You are like at best flatlining. And on a bad day, you are as bad as you've ever been, both in terms of your mental pain and your physical pain. So let's try something different. And in Oakland, so I live in San Francisco, right across the bridge in Oakland, or on BART, you should take BART instead. There is an amazing one of these programs. It's called L'Chaim. and we should put it in the show notes because everyone should be aware, either for yourself or your friends and colleagues. This is a resource. It's an unbelievable resource we have in the Bay Area. And if you are outside the Bay Area, you will find this as well. Go to Google and put IOP/PHP and look for local options for yourself. What it is, you sign up for a program like this. It might even be covered by your insurance, so look into that. And the program is something like a day program. You are not partially hospitalized. You are living in your house the whole time, but you go to this place or you join on Zoom every single day while you're in the program. And it'll have a schedule. It'll be like, show up at 9, we have a check-in at 9:30, then we have a support group in the morning, then we have a lunch break, everybody go for a walk, then we have like a class or some other type of group in the afternoon, then we have a checkout process, then everybody goes home. And while you're in the program, you have goals like, I want to feel better. And if you are someone who has struggled with suicidal ideation, I want to not hurt myself during the program. So it's a very explicit wellness intervention. And that is one of the main things I wanted to tell people today, Allie. I wish I had known. I wish I had known that if you have tried everything, and you've tried everything on the medical track, and you've tried everything on the mental health track with your own therapist or psychiatrist, and you still haven't gotten out of it, I highly recommend this option because it is intensive. It's like going back to school just for your mental health. And the community support you get, both from the staff at a program like this and from the other peers, so your own people like co-sufferers with you, I was not prepared for how much that would help me. I really thought I have to crack this myself. It's me, I'm the problem, I have to crack it. But going into the IOP PHP environment, like a clinical environment, the support you receive both from the staff and from the other people who are in the program with you, I've never experienced anything like that in my life. And I attribute that to a huge extent to why I would be fine right now, like why I'm actually in the face of a lot of external difficulty doing so much better on the inside. It's because of that community support, even more than the expertise and skills that I learned from going to a program like that. So that is something very, very, very important. I wish there were a class in school about looking after yourself and they would just mention this option, because many, many people don't find it until they're in a real crisis, and that shouldn't be necessary. You're already in a crisis if you haven't been able to feel better for 5 years. Even if it doesn't feel like a crisis, let's see if we could get you out of that by using an option like this. So I'm not a doctor. I can't claim anything would work for any specific, but based on my own experience, I really, really credit that program with the state you see me in now. One other thing I'd mention is just about timing. You can go to an IOP for 2 weeks or 4 weeks. I actually ended up staying from August all the way till the next March. And that is a huge amount of time. That's long enough to have a baby in that famous analogy. But that is part of how I got to a point where I'm doing so much better. So that is a very important part of the story. There's lots of other things that worked as well, which I should also mention at some point, but that's the biggest lever that I found was that program.
I thank you so much for sharing this option. And I know there are audience within this community that may benefit from it someday. It's interesting for me to know, because you mentioned you've been doing therapy every week before that. And I know you have a supportive family and how much they supported you. You have supportive friends. So it seems like the support and the community aspect within the Lahayam program that you joined, it's been special. I want to know what was special about it. What are some of the aspect of it that made it you know what, Genevieve? This actually makes sense now. I love everyone else who supported me, but this is working because.
Yeah, that is such a good question. I think so. I do want to recognize how much support I'm lucky to have outside of that program. You are definitely right. My therapeutic support, my medical support, my social support, my family support. I am rich in support and have been pretty much this whole time. I'm very, very lucky to have that. I think the difference in a program like this is your wellness is your own focus, and the staff of the program are also focused on that. So unlike in regular life where everybody has their life and we're all doing all of our stuff and we're helping each other as much as we can, but that's not our main focus, in the program, that is your focus and that is those other people's focus. And then your peers are trying to feel better themselves and they're trying to help you feel better. And even that second part is like optional in an IOP. You might come in thinking like, I can't help anyone. Like I can't help myself. I'm wrecked. Like I'm not going to help anyone else. But looking back on it, just that immense focus on recognition of suffering. People are really, really struggling. They have passed the point of being able to fake it. They have to come into something like this to actually feel better. And then during your day there, all of your activities are structured towards helping you develop skills you can use or helping you like work through old stories so that you don't have to carry them around anymore. Mm-hmm. Like these kinds of explicit interventions in order to heal you, that is what I didn't have prior to the program. And I think that is, for me, that's the differentiator between just like wonderful social support that you have outside of a program like this to the like laser focus on your own well-being that you get to have when you're in the program.
Thank you. This now makes a lot of sense. And for those who are listening, as Genevieve mentioned, just look up PHP IOP in your own area. Like if you live in Atlanta, just PHP IOP Atlanta and see what comes up. And we'll also like put links to L'Chaim program into our show notes. If you're in the Bay Area, please. It's a program that's tested by our beloved Genevieve here. So please use that. And I also want to throw a keyword here, Tai Chi.
Huge part of why I'm in the state I'm in now. So keyword, Tai Chi is actually 2 words. So I'm going to isolate Chi. Chi is this very important keyword. You should also search this on Google. You can search for QI or you can search for CHI. And funnily enough, Ali, because I mentioned human-computer interaction before, that acronym is HCI, but back in the day, it was actually CHI, computer-human interaction. So CHI has been part of my life this entire time, and I just was not bright enough to realize there's this whole second meaning. And CHI or QI Chi is basically the force from the Star Wars universe. It is a concept. You don't even have to believe in it in a faith context. You can just pretend you believe in it. But the idea is that you have your own personal chi, which is like what powers your body. It's a form of energy. And you are surrounded by an ocean of chi, an infinite amount of chi. There's heavenly chi, there's earth chi, there's all different types of flavors of chi. But as a chi practitioner, someone who uses this concept, and again, you don't even have to believe in it. You just pretend to manipulate it if you don't believe in it. You can actually use this as a tool for self-transformation or for giving peace into the universe, because it's similar to meditation. If you do certain types of meditation, like you are refocusing yourself towards doing something that will have a good impact. And I am not as much a Tai Chi practitioner as a Qigong practitioner. And Qigong, so Qigong, is Qi, which we already talked about as the force, and Gong means work. So you are working your Qi. And I do daily practice every single day with these amazing human beings named Malcolm and Annie Dean. I'm going to recommend them for a future podcast. They are both in their 60s. They have been practicing for multiple decades. Not both of them, but in together, they are probably practicing for more than 50 years. And they are both artists, so they are deeply creative. They use words to describe things regarding your chi. And Annie in particular uses visual imagery. So she'll tell you, like, I see like this golden liquid around me. And she describes sensations like I feel like I have warm honey inside. That's another way that people think about chi. So the Qigong practice, I should definitely mention how I found that, because that is really important and interesting. And maybe even more good context is I am not a religious person. I don't believe in God. I don't really believe in organized religion. I'm sorry to say that. I don't judge you if you do. I really don't. But for myself, it has never been something that I felt like solved anything for me. And I'm a cynic. So I'm like, nothing works. Medicine doesn't work. This doesn't work. That doesn't work. Like woo-woo stuff doesn't work. Like those are some of my orientations in life. But here I am, like a Qigong practitioner, telling you that like the force is real. So I want you to know, if you have those mental barriers, like, what is this? Like, she's talking about something like very, very, floaty. It's not real. It can't help me. Just pretend it could help you and see if it can help you. So let's see. So I told you March 2021, that's when my symptoms skyrocketed. I was in so much pain, I could barely function. I couldn't drive a car because I couldn't sit down. I was also fainting, so I couldn't do anything, because if you faint in public, you might like pass out and get hit by a car. So somehow or other, I went to see an acupuncture person, and I'll tell that story another time too, how I found my way to her. Her name is Courtney Moore. She will be in the show notes. She is an absolute lifesaver of a human being. If you're in the Bay Area, that's another must try. And I went to see her, and it wasn't the first time I went to see her, but within a few times of seeing her, she sat me down. Actually, I was lying down and she was standing, and she told me this. She said, "Genevieve, you are hemorrhaging vital resources."
Mhm.
And at that time, like I told you, I had this explosion of physical symptoms. So I knew something was wrong, right? But no one had said to me, your own vital resources are just like escaping. You are not, this is part of why you're doing so badly, is that you're just not keeping any of your vitality. It's all just like draining out all the time in an uncontrolled manner. And I think I could have freaked out at that time. I could have been like, that's it. Like, how do you stop that? Like, I don't even know what vital resources are. Like, how do you stop a hemorrhage? And I think that person, Courtney Moore, must have mentioned Qigong or Tai Chi, because I don't think my brain would have naturally made that link, although it might have, because I have been interested in that like for a very, very long time. But somehow the link was made that I should look into Qi practices. So I did have a web search history where I had found a wonderful, wonderful Tai Chi and Qigong center in San Francisco prior to the pandemic. And because of the pandemic, I hadn't been able to start that practice. And I really wanted to. So even before this story occurred, I was like, I think something like that could probably help me. And I did not get to explore it. But after Courtney Moore told me, you are hemorrhaging vital resources, I thought, I should see if they're still there. So I went back online. I looked for this like Qigong and Tai Chi in San Francisco again. That center was no longer there. And I was like, that's it. I'm hosed. I don't think this is ever going to be solvable. Like, I don't even know how to start finding a Tai Chi class if it's not that center. And don't forget, when you're depressed, you can't visualize any solution. So I'm like, oh my God, I'm out of luck.
Mhm.
But one little web search more, and I learned that Malcolm and Annie Dean, who are the people who had that studio in San Francisco, had moved their practice up to Washington State and were now offering it by Zoom. So there does exist, and continues to exist to this day, a daily Zoom practice of Qi Gong, working with your internal energy and external energy, Qi, 8 a.m. Pacific time every weekday, and 9 a.m. Pacific time, Saturdays and Sundays. And Malcolm and Annie take almost no holidays. There's a very rare time where they will take like a 4-day break or something like that, but it's day in, day out. And in this practice, you are working on your vital resources. If they're hemorrhaging, you are working on stopping the hemorrhaging. If you're like overwhelmed by stuff, you're working on like your boundaries so that you can actually have energy but not get overloaded. And I think it healed mental pain for me. I think it healed physical pain. I can feel it now. If I take like a week off, I feel worse, both ways, mental and physical. It has helped me with my imagination, getting my creativity back, because Annie, with those visualizations, like once you start to visualize stuff, you're like, oh, I can actually see like the colors associated with different parts of my body. It's amazing that that could happen. And who cares if that's real or if that's just your imagination? Like, your imagination, especially if you're in any kind of creative profession or a creative person, your imagination is what is one of the most important vital resources you have. And so having a daily practice that's about that, it's about your physical wellness and your mental wellness, including your creativity. I don't know where I would be without that. I do not, I mean, I think I might have healed from mental pain via the therapy path that I told you about. But in terms of getting my true like sparkle back and having ideas again, I think it's Qigong. I really do. And I would not hesitate to recommend that to everyone listening if they haven't tried that before. Like I said, I was a cynic. I was like, why would I do that? I'm not doing that. But try it, maybe, because it was absolutely life-changing for me.
Thank you for piecing the puzzles together because I know you as a creative person day and night. And I mean, I learned from you in that sense. And it's interesting to know like there are two pieces that you heavily worked on. One is just getting that mental well-being back through the program, to getting your true self back into the to the sports game, like whatever it is.
Yeah,
And for
right.
you, it's the creativity and like that side of you that you shine and you help people to shine in it. And you've been getting it back through finding that source, finding that force.
Yeah,
I
source
want to
and
know
force. They're both
source
right.
and force. I want to know, how does that look like for you? What is your
Mm-hmm.
visualization? Annie's using like a
Ooh,
warm honey. By the way, we're going to be inviting for sure. We are already talking with Annie and Malcolm. We're going to be
yeah.
inviting them to the show. Hopefully they accept. I'm wondering, how is that energy and how is that force for you looking like? Because
Yeah,
I know you're a
yeah,
creative person, you're a good visualizer. I want to know, what does it look like?
yeah. Yeah, this excellent question. And again, like an honor to answer this question. I listened to the Ally show to get ready to be on your show with you. And so I heard Phil Carter in the previous episode say this Marcus Aurelius quote. So I'm going to read this because this is relevant to your question. The Marcus Aurelius quote was, "Look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if thou wilt ever dig." And the shocking thing about this quote, I don't think Marcus Aurelius was a Qigong practitioner, but this idea of bubbling up, like something can bubble up and that can fill something, that visualization is so powerful. And let me give you an example. So in Qigong, the bottoms of your feet are described as your bubbling wells. And the idea is that you like have openings in the bottom of your own feet where the energy that's coming up out of the earth's chi, we would say, is coming up into your own body through the soles of your feet, through your bubbling wells. And from there, if you're using your imagination, you can like draw that like goodness, right, up through your whole body. So you can be like, now it's in my feet. Now it's in my calves. My knees feel horrible. So let me like wash them with chi from the inside. Then they're coming up my upper legs. Then they're in my hip flexors, which are incredibly important. That's another whole interview we should do. But part of lower back pain is often issues with your hip flexors. And in the Qigong practice, you can visualize like healthy Qi just like flowing around those areas. So your SI joints, any of this like psoas problems, like all of that, please call me and I will help you with this because you can use the imagination of Qi like rolling around inside your own pelvis. And that happens to be where your energy center is considered to be in the practice of Qigong. You have this beautiful sphere that kind of lives right around your lower abdomen, sitting inside your pelvis. And that is called your Dan Shen. And that is your center. That is the center of your physical body, what they would call your energetic body. Your Qi is your energetic body. Your mental body, which we tend to think lives up here, but in the Qigong practice, it really lives down in your lower abdomen. And your spiritual body. So again, not a religious person, don't believe in anything. I'm now like, I kind of get it because I didn't have access to my spiritual body before. That's part of why I was doing so poorly. And now I do. And your spiritual body does do things like give you ideas. So we spend some time in that middle of your body. You're putting all this like good chi from the earth into your danshan, into your lower abdomen. And then from there, it can float all the way up through your entire body. So come up through your torso. It can like relieve shoulder pain. It can go down your arms. You feel it in your fingers a lot. Like people who are practitioners, sometimes their hands swell up because they can feel so much like flow when you're doing these motions with your fingers and hands. And you can do your head. So, as you know, because you have a mental health oriented podcast, a lot is going on up here. And it can be physical, it can be mental, you can have a migraine, a lot is happening in your head. And in the Qigong practice, you can also do this down from heaven, but in our example, we're bringing it up from earth. You just wash all that stuff out. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
practice we do on Sunday mornings where we basically like wave chi over our own heads. And I think of this as like organizing your iron filings, like a magnet puts everything in the right direction. And all of a sudden, like it goes from being chaos to being like all orderly. And you can just wash it over yourself. And this, you just keep doing it till you feel clear headed. And you can also go the other way and you can really feel a difference. This is one of those ones where we do it every Sunday as like a special practice. If I don't do it, I'm like, it's loud up there. There's a lot like stuff going on. And if I do this practice, like, again, I don't know why it works, but for me, it does work. All of a sudden, I'm like, it's quiet inside. Like, I have an idea. I can see a different idea, nothing to do with Qigong, just because I got it to quiet down up there. And it's been really delightful to realize like these physical movements that you do can actually directly impact your like mental state. Even if you don't believe that will work, even if you think that sounds like hooey, try it. See if by using your imagination to be like, I'm organizing my iron filings right now, everything is going from chaos to order, like maybe that would actually work. So that's an example of how I use my imagination during the practice.
That is in so many ways amazing. As you were saying, going through the practice, I happen to be doing actually this interview stand up today. As you may see, I may be moving too much. And as you were saying, I'm like, I'm gonna go with it, and like feeling the bubbles coming up, and like then doing all these, and it works. And it reminded me of the body scanning meditations
Yes, that's
we
right.
do on our podcast, sometimes my Persian podcast, and today's app, by the way, 10-minute pause. Go download it if you're Persian. Download and like use my meditation.
Even if you're not Persian, it's fascinating. You can still meditate even if you can't understand the words that are being said.
Thank you. Actually, I would be actually interested if somebody who's not Persian listening to the practices and see what they feel. But it's interesting because within that, the best meditation I've seen working for the majority is the body scanning. That's the one everyone can relate to, but that's the one in the beginning everyone is most hesitant to do. Like people are okay if we like say, hey, think about good memories, blah. It feels so easier because we are so in touch with our head, but we are not that much in touch with our entire body. But as soon as you start doing it, it works the best because it allows you to believe and see all those pieces in your body. So I think what you were saying really, really resonated with me personally. The other part is like I wanted to say how happy I am, like how to see how you are like finding that spiritual self and like finding it and bringing that creativity out of it. I this is not planned. I happen to have this book from Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way.
Yes, I'm
And I
looking at
know,
my copy. It's right in the room with me.
right? I mean, usually creative folks have it. I have it right here on my desk. Part of the words that she's talking about so famously is like a spiritual path to higher creativity. And I think it seems like you're on that spiritual path to find your creativity. I'm so happy to hear that, and also seeing this connection right here. I had to call it out.
Of
And
course.
I wanted to also like see how you're doing today, like after all of this. I mean, it's something we see, and I also want to know how you're doing. How's life?
How is life? So first of all, let me just say Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, A Spiritual Path to Higher Creativity. Someone at L'Chaim gave me this book as a gift at the end of the program. And more or less, all of a sudden, I was like, wait a minute, I did this before. I did this in my 20s when I was living in London. I was completely creatively like stuck. I was the worst designer of all time at that point because I had literally no ideas and no critical thinking abilities. And I worked through the Artist's Way, like the 12-week full on program. And it like absolutely changed everything for me back in my 20s. And just as an indication of how removed I was from myself and what I needed, I never even thought about picking that book up again. I thought I was physically ill. So I was like, what's that going to do? Like, that's not even, I didn't even think about it, honestly. And as I was leaving L'Chaim, I was like, you need to do this all over again. Like it doesn't do itself. This particular thing you actually have to engage with if you want to be on a spiritual path to higher creativity. So how I'm doing right now, unbelievable thing happened. In December 2024, I had an idea for something I wanted to do. And my therapist was very, very in favor of it. She's like, it's easy, just like start, you're already ready. And I was like, I don't think I'm ready. I need to stay inside the cave a little longer. I haven't fully come out into the world since being that ill and being in like intensive treatment program all the way till March 2024. So in December, I'm like, I don't know. And then somehow over the month of December, the following things happened. I went to see Hamilton for the very first time in person in San Francisco. I went to Fort Worth, Texas to see my own cousin's opera, where she wrote the libretto for an opera called Earth 2.0. Another whole podcast we should do about that.
Let's do it.
But I saw those back to back, one on the Saturday and one on the Sunday of a weekend in December. And then over the December like holiday break, I did not work. I did other things. I had a wonderful holiday experience with some friends on the actual Christmas day. And then my parents came around the New Year's holidays. So I was just not thinking about work. And somehow on January 6th, I woke up that day and I was like, I'm just going to start. I'm ready. I have the plan. It's easy. And all I did, Ali, is I went onto LinkedIn, which I haven't been on, by the way, since I really felt awful. Like in 2023, I just completely dropped off of that piece of technology. And I said, hey, everyone, Happy New Year. It's a great time to like be thinking big about new things. So let me just say I'm soft launching my coaching business today. And I don't know what I thought would happen. I didn't think anything would happen. I'm like, you haven't been on LinkedIn. They're going to bury this post. Nobody cares about this. And somehow, like over one day, all of a sudden, so many people from my past who I didn't even know I was connected to on LinkedIn were like, hey, this makes so much sense. I'm so glad to hear from you. And the following day, I posted my calendar. I made a Calendly and I was like, everyone who wants to talk to a coach, like grab 30 minutes for free in January, just have at it. Like, it'll be great. Same thing. I thought nothing will happen. Like, who wants to talk to me? I'm like a dud. Like, I'm not even interesting anymore. I've suffered so much. Like, even though I'm okay, I'm not interesting to talk to. And over 2 or 3 days, every single spot in January got claimed. Some by people I already know and love, some by people I never met in my life. And on the calendar, I'm like, tell me why you want to get together. Like, tell me one little, I said, how's your career going? TLDR. And what's one little question you want to talk about? And people are writing like multiple paragraphs of their suffering around their work journey to a stranger just because I said like, hey, my door's open. Like, come on in for 30 minutes. We'll just chat. And so over the course of January, I talked to all of those people. Every single conversation, I was like, I'm so lucky. Like, I'm so lucky someone came here to share this story. And they're dramatic, just like what we're talking about. Folks have burnout. They've been out of work for 18 months. Can I ever work again? They have physical pain. They have family stuff. Like, people are struggling, right? Plus, we have a certain thing happening in Washington, D.C. Like, there's a lot of struggle right now. And I felt so honored to be a person with whom others would share, including strangers I've never met before. And I did not try this as like a sales exercise. I was extremely like casual, like, if you want to talk again, if you want to pay for a coaching relationship, like, here's what we would do, but that's not the point of this. And now, so we're only like, maybe, what is that, 6 weeks into that cycle since January 6th. I more or less feel like the coaching practice is alive. It's called Cherry Red Coaching. You can find it on LinkedIn and you can find me on LinkedIn. And I have something like between 10 and 20 people who are my clients. I was talking to 5 different people yesterday, including 2 different 2-hour calls to go through people's interview prep. And I love every single minute of it. And every single Zoom call, I'm like, ooh, I can't wait to do that, which is not how I felt towards my Zoom calls prior to this. So it's been a really special time for me. And it's been a privilege to have like a happy story going on while so much other stuff is like coming down that is not good. The external situation is very, very poor. But to have one little piece of that where I'm like, ooh, a little flower is growing all by itself, that has been extremely powerful. And I'm really, really delighted that that seems to be unfolding that way. So that is how I'm doing right now. And I'm very, very lucky to be able to answer that question in that way.
And I think including everyone who knows you and loves you, we are also lucky that you're offering this space and letting people learn from you directly. I had that honor. I think that's so luxury. I mean, it's the luxury I had in my life, like just in general, having great mentors and great managers. Like you listen to Phil's podcast as well, Phil's episode. Just another amazing person in my life. Will Haywood, you, like there's the name just goes on. I know I had that luxury and I want everyone to have that luxury. So this is not an ad or anything. This is just like
No, it's
genuinely,
not an ad.
if you want to get some of that amazing guidance in your life, get on Genevieve's Calendly while you can, because I know it's gonna be gone soon. Like she's only gonna have so much time, and I know now with your understanding of how you want to take care of your mental health, I'm sure like you have some boundaries there. So that's a great opportunity for those who can. I think, and I wish someday you also like bring some of those kind of like general learnings into the audience
I
broadly,
would
like
love to,
in a
love to.
form. I know you have a Substack. We're going to put that link into the show notes. Do you have any other things that you're thinking about how to bring those learnings and those wisdom that you have into the general public?
Ooh. um, so the Substack is a perfect example of this. So when I started the coaching practice, more or less I've been doing this for people for free for like forever. So I don't really think anything started in January, but let's just date it from January 6th because that's when I like soft launched something into the public sphere. I did not think I will do anything else. I'm like, I'm starting one business, that's plenty. But when January 20th, again, external situation, I won't say what happened that day, but something very significant happened on January 20th. And I was like, you also need a channel for saying what you think. And that voice might help others who are like, what is even going on? If they can hear a voice, they can understand, and maybe that will help them feel seen. It's very similar to when I was putting Slack emojis on everybody's Slacks. I want people who I know are struggling to like process the news to have a place to go and be like, what is that voice saying right now, to tune into something that might be meaningful to them. So I started that Substack on January 10th, writing about what happened that day. And since then, I'm using that as a place to talk about what I want folks to know as like resources, and also just like a different format of getting news. Break any news in that. It is called a newsletter. And I do feel like it's part of the news how certain voices are responding to certain things. And so that is one channel that I did not expect to invest in so quickly and at such, I do it frequently and I write at length. You don't have to read it, y'all. You can just sign up and you don't have to even open the emails. But it has already started to be a vehicle where I can say, I'm hearing this from all the clients. I'll just write about that. I won't even mention that like lots of people brought this up this
Yeah.
week, but it's part of why I write about certain things at certain times. And so having that kind of feedback loop amongst the things I'm learning from my own clients and prospective clients into a written format where I can say, this is kind of how the world looks to me on this day. And here's 3 things I hope you can keep in mind. That as a feedback loop is already super exciting. And then we'll add being the queen of all media at a later point. But those 2 different formats, having like a coaching practice where you get to talk to people all day, and then having a written form where you can actually say, hey, based on what I heard, I think I'm going to write about this. That has been really, really creative already and feels productive, not in a toxic productivity way, but like something good is being created through that feedback loop.
That sounds awesome. Thank you for giving. Speaking of giving, one question that we have, and we are almost trying to wrap up the conversation because I know you have limited time too. But one question we ask all of our guests is, in the spirit of giving, if you would like to participate in something for the audience mental health, what would be something that you would commit to doing with them for about like 30 days that improves their mental health and hopefully your mental health too? We're in it together.
Excellent, excellent question. So I did craft a little plan for you and your
Yay.
audience. The plan is called March Madness. And over the month of March, I would offer to anyone who cares to participate from your audience some form of daily collaboration. I haven't decided yet. Is it a Zoom thing? Is it an email thing? What are we doing exactly via which means? But work on who are you right now? How are you feeling? What action might you take to relieve some of those feelings? If you have zero creativity, what can we do about it? If you have mental pain, what can we do about it? If you have physical pain, what can we do about it? And I think that over the course of March, that's spring, which is very, very powerful month, like not in astrological terms or anything, but just in terms of the seasons. That is a season of growth. All of a sudden, the hills turn green in San Francisco. I'm wearing flowers in my hair all the time, but like real flowers start popping out at that time. And I want you to cultivate your own like growth, your own garden during that month of March. Take advantage of spring to actually do something to feel better, just like the world feels better when all of that growth starts happening in the spring. And even if you're in a very like bad, I would almost say dead state, like you don't feel like doing anything, see if you can start like 2 or 3 days into the month of March. Something we do in the artist way is you just write morning pages, like scribble out 3 pages every morning, like just do that like the first 1 or 2 days of March and see if you start to see any little signs of hope that over that month you can actually invest in feeling better. And I wanted to call it March Madness because I like using these words like mad and crazy that we shouldn't use anymore because it's unkind to people with mental health issues. As a person with mental health issues, I'm like, it is. We're all mad. We're all crazy. Like, it's okay. Like, use those words. It's fine. And March Madness, it's a basketball term, but it's also like, let it out. Whatever it is, whatever you're like hiding or, trying not to deal with, let it out. It's spring. The animals are popping out everywhere. Like, go ahead and let it out and deal with it rather than keep it stagnant or keep avoiding that thing that you probably need to reckon with. So I would offer my own personal support to convene some kind of an experience for your audience over the course of March to really ask, like, how am I doing? What might I do to feel a little bit better, a little more growth?
I love this, and I could have follow-up questions, but you answered all of them. I can I can share my reflection to it, which is like as Persians, like we're celebrating Persian New Year, which is celebrated across Farsi speakers and more those who love to celebrate the spring. And this kind of like timing of a spring is very special to me. It's a time of reflection. It's a time of actually restarting or starting again and believing that a starting again exists in the nature, so in you.
Yeah,
And I
completely.
think it's just such a beautiful artistic way that you embed it into the challenge. March Madness, it is. I love it. And we're going to be posting about it. Folks are going to be hearing if they want to sign up. There's a link in the show notes. They can join Genevieve's campaign for this awesome plan for March Madness. I want to wrap up the conversation, but before that, I want to know if there's anything that you wanted us to talk about, and if there's anything that's left out. I want to make sure everyone can hear that before us ending the call.
I think there's just one thing I want to leave folks with. Both of us came to this call today on Riverside. We can see each other. We each took the time to like wear a special garment and think about our background, like your amazing background that now looks like spring or like sunrise to me. I keep these growing things purposely in my Zoom calls and I wear my earrings. They're like sparkly and I put stuff in my hair because this is an opportunity for creativity. Just how you show up, whether on Zoom or in the world, what you're wearing, how you're presenting yourself, it's an opportunity for creativity. And if you are the most depressed you've ever been, you probably don't even want to put clothes on. But if you can be like, well, it might be funny to wear my cherry shirt today since I'm talking about cherry red coaching, ha ha ha. That is creativity. You just did it. And the funny thing is, once you do even a little bit, it has a ripple effect. So I walk around wearing this shirt and I come to Zoom meetings with my clients, and some of the clients are like, ha ha, you're wearing that shirt. It's like the name of your company. Like, it's very funny. And it gives you like a moment of joy, which is so rare, right? Some folks are having zero joy. Have a tiny little bit, and you can trigger it with something as easy as like whether you put earrings in or whether you choose like a funny shirt versus like not getting dressed or out of bed at all. So I really, really want to remind people that even if you are at your worst, you have zero to give, you hate everything, you're out of F's, like what little tiny little gift of creativity and growth can you give yourself? Because that's how you start. And I very, very much believe in that. Like a tiny little start, even when you think you can't, it can have a huge, huge ripple effect for yourself and even for others.
That is such a great reminder. And I just had a trip to Japan, and I was so fascinated by all these little things that they're using, like the little toys and the little drawings and paintings and the doodles. They're all around the corner, how
Yeah,
they are
that's
bringing
right.
joy and like hanging little toys into their backpack. And it just, my reflection at that time was like, I'm so jealous at like how easily they bring joy to their lives without questioning it. So it's just like learning for me, it was remembering and how I learned and what I learned from that culture by bringing some joy into our day to days. I love the cherry shirt that you chose for today. I also want to give credit to my friend Edison for sending me this backlight. He's
Ooh.
like, yeah, your podcast is boring. Let's just put some light into it. And
And
Edison
his name is
telling,
Edison, one
yeah,
of the
exactly.
inventors of the light bulb. That's pretty fun.
Yeah, and one day I just saw the light in my front porch and like, hey, it's from Edison. He sent this light to me. So it's great, like how also like I think what's interesting about this little story is like how others can also like if you see somebody that is struggling, you can also bring joy into their lives by sending small light, by
Yep,
sending
yep,
a small
yep,
flower, or by sending
yep.
a small little toy that, hey, I just thought of
Hmm.
you today.
Yeah, I saw this
And
and thought of you. Yeah,
right, and these little things that we can pick up that have that kind of like creativity into them, don't be hesitant. Like it's not weird, it's
agreed.
actually fun and creative. Maybe we are biased because we love design and creativity, but it is what it is. So thank you so much for this and everything else that you brought to today's show. Thank you for all the great conversations, learnings you shared. And yeah, hope to see you in the next conversations that we will have. Hope to see you in person again. And that's it from me. Thank you so much for joining us today.
So let's close with Tai Chi greeting. So it's like you're going to punch the person. So make a fist, you're going to punch them, but then you cover it. So you're going to punch, but instead you bow. And this is what they do in Kung Fu Panda, speaking of fun. So this is how I try to close lots of my calls at the moment with this Tai Chi checkout. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I was so happy to speak with you, Ali, and I'm so happy to speak to everyone out there who does listen to this now or in the future. It's an honor to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today.